Are you tired of being out deadlifted by 135-pound 16-year-olds? I know I am. Today, we're gonna walk through deadlift training to help get you from mediocre to good to maybe even great. So without any further ado, let's jump into Operation Super Saiyan Deadlift. Yes, I am a nerd. I'm not gonna apologize for it. I've even got the Dragon Ball Z shirt on. You cannot stop me. This is my channel. Let's do it. First off, like we did with my bench press training video, we have to know who this advice is for. This is not for your first day in the gym. Most everything works when you are starting out with training. So just continue to do what you're doing within reason, as long as you're not training handstand presses and whatever, and you're trying to get in the circus, unless that's what you want. But if you want to gain tissue, a fundamentally sound overloading program is going to do everything you need it to do. Don't go crazy in the weeds just yet. So this is for intermediate to advanced trainees, powerlifters or strength enthusiasts who want to increase their deadlift, and people who have a general idea of their recovery. And I put it here as volume tolerance, but with the deadlift, I also mean just general recovery. Because unlike the bench press, the deadlift is incredibly taxing for most human beings. Meaning, you're not gonna be able to get away with a ton of extra volume and a ton of extra frequency if your intensity is pretty high, which we want it to be when we're training the deadlift. Another unique feature of the deadlift is that there are two forms of deadlifting that are legal in competition. Yes, legal in competition, meaning not cheating. Go cry about it, sumo haters. Trust me. I've gone back and forth between both. Sumo, for me, is definitely easier. But if I'm trying to win and it's within the rules of the competition, there is no external manhood or ego that's gonna cause me to then switch to conventional. Do I train conventional deadlift? Absolutely, I think it is a very valuable exercise. But when we're talking about kilos onto our total, I'm gonna go with the route that allows me to pull more weight. So don't let anybody get you down if you pull sumo, and stop being elitist, you conventional pullers. They're both good exercises, but we have to take into account the differences between the two. The biggest difference that I have seen personally and with my coaching is that sumo pullers tend to recover a little bit better. This is a generality. You may not recover better from sumo. That's totally fine. But the general population of sumo pullers are able to maybe add in an extra day of frequency, an extra touch on the movement, rather than the conventional pullers who are usually pretty fried after a heavy primary day and maybe a secondary accessory. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're a sumo puller, you may be able to squeeze out a little bit more work, which may then allow you to put a little bit more weight on the bar. The other thing is oftentimes when you are pulling sumo, there's a tendency for you to get a little bit of interference from your squat work because sumo is a little bit more quad dominant than the conventional pull. You need your quads, especially off the floor. So if you're doing a lot of squatting and your quads are getting pretty beat up from that, you have to understand your tolerance to that movement, but you also have to understand, are you gonna get a carryover effect from your squatting? So it just goes into how you program. You may not wanna have a heavy squat and then a heavy sumo pull back to back in your training week. But again, these are all generalities. You have to find out what works best for you. Each lift has its pros and cons, like I discussed already. We need to get rid of the elitism. I mean, it's fun, it's memes, you know, but at the end of the day, if you really believe any of this stuff, you gotta grow up. You gotta get out of your mom's basement. Okay, let's start with deadlift frequency. Frequency means the amount of times during a training week that you are engaging with the lift, that you are going for a deadlift. I think that 99% of people do not need to be deadlifting more than 2 times a week. The benefits are far outweighed by the cost of adding in another deadlift day. So we're gonna talk about just deadlifting twice a week. Listen, if you're just starting out, 1 time a week is probably gonna be enough for you. You don't have to max out all of these categories to make gains. Making gains is about finding the things that are going to continue to push you forward without incredible recovery costs so that it doesn't take away from the rest of the training. And deadlift is very much a recovery-based lift. Are you ready to pull at the same level that you are week by week? And does the amount that you're pulling then cause the rest of your lifts to suffer? We have to make those sacrifices because the deadlift is incredibly taxing, especially when you start getting into the 600, 700, and 800 pound pullers. it becomes really tough to even deadlift more than once in like a 9-day cycle. So we're not going to get into tertiary or quaternary days like we did with the bench press. We're just going to stick to our primary deadlift day and our secondary deadlift day. And our primary deadlift is going to be comp specific with ascending intensity with a little bit lower volume. I have found, and a lot of coaches that I talk to have found, that the deadlift responds very well to a higher intensity, lower volume prescription. Generalities, folks. Don't go crazy in the comments. Just because you are good with high volume does not mean the rest of the world is. I'm trying to make a general recommendation. Please don't kill me in the comments. I'm begging you. We are going to take that approach of a higher intensity, meaning the relative intensity of the weight, your higher percentages, your higher RPEs, with a little bit lower volume than we did with the bench press. And if you haven't seen the bench press video, you don't know what I'm talking about, click on this right here. You'll learn about the bench press, and then you can come back to this one. Actually, finish this one first. Our secondary deadlift is going to be weakness specific. So if in our primary work or in our 1 rep max testing, we notice that we are getting stuck at our lockout, that we're really sticky off the floor, that we're really not holding position well, then we want to implement a secondary movement that is going to give us more touches on the deadlift, but also help us work through that sticking point. So that's what I mean by our secondary accessory days. It's not a glute ham raise, that's a supplemental movement. An accessory movement for me is going to be a deadlift variation that is going to help push you through a sticking point or get you stronger in a specific range of motion. So 2 days a week frequency. You can start with 1 and then move to 2 if you feel like it. How are we going to program our primary days? Well, that's a great question. We are going to do singles followed by back down sets. Very similar to our bench press training. I am a big believer that singles are incredibly important in an intermediate to advanced program for powerlifting, because that's what we do. The competition is based around singles. So I like to practice that way. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have singles in your program year round. There can be times for more volume, for more just general base building and workload building. But when we're talking about getting stronger and leading into a 1 rep max test or a competition, I like having the singles in there. So we're going to do a top set single followed by back down sets in the 3 to 5 rep range. So we're tightening up that rep range just a little bit. A lot of people struggle getting past 5 or 6 reps on the deadlift. It becomes superfluous. It becomes over volume that you just don't need. You're still making good progress if you can just find a rep range that works best for you. This is based on my personal experience and my coaching experience. You may have a different experience. How many times am I going to say that? RPE or percentage based, depending on your preference. Now, I will say, if you are just starting out with RPE, or you have always used percentages, if you are more comfortable with percentage-based training, stick to that, because the deadlift is a tricky lift. You can think that what you just pulled for your single is an RPE 7, but you watch it back on video and it's like, man, that was a 5. That was a warm-up. Or you can think that you're going in for an RPE 8 and you're absolutely maxing out at 10. People have tendency to misrepresent this lift quite a bit. So just for that reason, having a hard and fast percentage may be better to get you the work that you need. Now, you're gonna lose a little bit of auto-regulation, and if your percentages are not on point, you may start to push yourself into that over-fatigue, but that's a sacrifice I think you should be willing to make. So I would say 80% of you probably should stick with percentage for the first, 6 weeks, maybe 2 blocks that you run this, and then try and auto-regulate a little bit. We're gonna do 3 to 6 working sets depending on our volume tolerance. Like I always say, start with the lowest end. Can you get away with the lowest end? Why are you maxing out? Why are we using a nuclear bomb when firebombing would work? That's in poor taste. I apologize. That's a history joke. Why are you using a sledgehammer when a ball peen hammer would do the job? We're gonna move on. These are getting a little strange. 3 to 6 working sets. So before we talk about secondary programming, I want to talk about the options for secondary deadlift movements, the accessories that we talked about a little bit ago. Let's start first with conventional, because while there is some crossover, there are some moves that I think fit better for conventional and some moves that I think fit better for sumo. Just in general, the ability to set them up, the ability to do them in a good rep range. So first and foremost, if you are weak off of the floor, if that bar just gets stapled to the floor and you feel like you will never be able to pull it, we want to work deficit deadlifts. We want to increase our deficit by 1/2 inch to 1 inch so that we can increase that range of motion, so that we can learn to be better off of the floor, be more explosive, train in a harder range of motion, so that when we get back to the easier range of motion, some of that will carry over. That is the theory behind the deficit deadlift. I really like it. I think it's a really solid move. If you are weak at lockout or in a specific position, like right below your knee, right above your knee, we can use rack pulls or block pulls at that specific height. The great thing about rack pulls or block pulls is because you're not going through the full range of motion, you can go a little bit heavier than you would if you were pulling off the floor. And that overload principle, much like we talked about when we overload with the board press and bench press, allows you to get comfortable handling heavier weights, handling what it takes to grind through a rep, to push your hips through, to lock a movement out. I think those are very valuable. I would recommend you do them off of blocks so that you get the bend in the bar, especially if you're using a deadlift bar. Using them in a rack, you don't get the ability to pull slack because the rack takes that away from you. So just something to keep in consideration. Pause deadlifts, I love pauses. I think pause deadlifts work a little bit better for sumo, but I have them on here because they do work well for conventional. Conventional feels a little bit more explosive. So you may see a little bit more form breakdown, but still the ability to get the lift, which is not a huge problem. But I have them on here because I think that they allow, especially newer people, new-ish people who still want to iron out their technique a little bit, it allows them to find a way to maintain positioning throughout a certain portion. If you're forced to pause, you kind of have to maintain that rigid upper back position, that hinge, I would pause probably an inch off the floor. That seems to be a great way. But if you're experiencing a form breakdown in a specific part of the range of motion, you can pause there and try and work through that. Deadlift against bands or chains, just another way to overload a specific range of motion. I really like band deadlifts. I think that it helps get off the floor, and then as the intensity continues to increase, you have to learn, okay, this is what it takes to really finish this lift, which I find has some psychological carryover. May not be for everybody, but I like it. And then RDLs or straight leg deadlifts, they are different movements, but they're very similar. So I have them combined here. If you have a weak hinge, if you're not great at the hinge movement, don't be mad. A lot of people are not good at hinging because we're taught our whole life not to hinge to pick things up. We're taught to lift with our knees. But when we're deadlifting and when we want to deadlift efficiently, we actually want to use our back. But we don't have the hinge mechanics ingrained in our brain yet. So we want to utilize the Romanian deadlift with a good hinge, with a good back position, or the straight leg deadlift off the floor with a good hinge. And it's just a good hamstring glute developer. I think it's one of the best compound movements for hypertrophy. There's a reason that bodybuilders keep Romanian deadlifts in their program a lot of the time. So those are my conventional deadlift secondary options. Sumo, a lot of the same. What we add in here on sumo is tempo. Now, tempo is great in a lot of cases, but it can get you into trouble if you over tempo something and then you try and get back to your primary lift and you're over tempoing that. Because with the deadlift especially, we want to have some explosion. We want to have some pop. So understanding that the tempo can help, but don't rely on the tempo and don't let the tempo then leak into your primary days. How are we going to tempo the sumo? What I like to do, because a lot of people have a problem with their sumo positioning, either they're too hinged forward, their legs aren't wide enough. The sumo is a little bit more technical than the conventional. What I like to do is a 3-second descent. So we have an explosive lift, we pause at the top, and then we slowly place the bar back on the ground. This is going to allow our brains to realize this is the right position for my body to be where the bar is, like down my leg, right? So, my chest needs to be here when it reaches my knee, or my chest needs to be here when it reaches my shin. This is how I need to open my hips as the bar is descending. So it's a very interesting concept. I like it a lot. Some people hate it. I will say with the sumo tempo stuff, you don't really want to go crazy with high rep ranges. You just need like 3 to 5. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And then we have the similar pause deadlifts, block pulls, deadlift against bands or chains. It's really hard to set up a deficit sumo. So that's why it's not on here, just for convenience sake. I mean, if you want to get 2 blocks and place them where your feet are going to be, that's totally fine. It's your deadlift programming at the end of the day. But I find it really difficult, so I just leave it for conventional. Okay, now that we have some moves that we're going to throw into our secondary day, let's go ahead and see how we are going to program them. I like on secondary days to lean more into RPE because especially if we're percentage based on our primary day, we're going to get some of that auto regulation now on our secondary day. We're not going to push insanely heavy on our secondary day because we know what is the intention of this secondary day? It's to help us work through weaknesses and to help us get more touches. It's not entirely just driving the deadlift forward and pushing weight onto the bar. So we have to keep that in mind. You can use percentages. You can. I just prefer to use RPE. We want to do 2 to 5 sets, again, starting on the low end, moving our way to the top end, 3 to 8 reps. I put on there keeping pause or tempo work below 5 is recommended. I find that anything past 5 reps with pause or tempo work just causes you to lose focus completely, and your pauses and your tempo just go to hell. Like, they're just not even worth it past 5 reps for a lot of people. If you are a robot and you're able to just lock in with your pauses and your tempo past 5 reps, go for it. But I would recommend below 5. Let's move into supplemental deadlift movements, meaning exercises outside of the scope of the deadlift that are going to help build the muscles utilized in the deadlift. For our back, I have just a little bit of a mnemonic device. Heavy rows, moderate pulls, light extensions. So you can use whatever kind of row you want and go heavy with it. You can use whatever kind of pull you want, pull up, pull down, whatever grip, go a little bit moderate on it with a little bit higher reps. And then when we're getting into extensions, like back extensions or the glute ham raise, we want to go a little bit lighter, a little bit higher reps. This is just something that I use to help me make sure that I'm touching all of my bases in my back, top to bottom, and I'm utilizing a lot of different rep ranges and getting stronger in those rep ranges. So I'm not going to give you specific exercises. I think a lot of exercises can work, especially when we're talking about just building strength. There is no perfect exercise. A lot of exercises work here, but this is a mnemonic that you can use to kind of program those accessory movements or those supplemental movements for yourself. Now, for our hamstrings, we're already getting a lot of hamstring work if we're utilizing an RDL or a straight leg deadlift. We want to use seated or lying leg curls. I have Nordics on there. They're really, 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 really hard for a lot of people. And for a lot of people, they're just not worth it. The practice that it takes to get into a good rep range, it just doesn't bear fruit for a lot of people. And you're spending too much time like getting into an awkward position, making sure you're not tearing your hamstring. Like, stick to the lying leg curl or the seated leg curl. Hopefully you're in a gym that has them. And if you're in a garage gym, your Romanian deadlift or your straight leg deadlift is going to do just enough for you. Now, quads and glutes. The great thing about the deadlift is that you have another lower body movement that you have to do for your sport. Squat, squat, squat. You will get so much carryover in your deadlift from your squat. It is pretty much the best accessory movement for the deadlift that is not deadlift specific. It bears out you're going to gain quad, you're going to gain low back, hips, glutes. You are going to get stronger in those muscles in the squat, and that is going to carry over to your deadlift. So that's all I'll say for that. You can throw leg press in there, wider stance squats if you're a sumo puller, but just squat, brother. Just get in the rack and squat. The last thing that we want to talk about is our grip, because a lot of people will get really strong in their lower body and their grip will fail them and they will lose. I don't know. I watched IPF Worlds. I don't know how many deadlifts people lost on grip. Now these people are pulling insane amount of weight, but in local competitions, people lose their deadlift on their grip. And the first thing they say is, man, my legs felt really good. I felt like I had 10, 20 more kilos. I just can't hold the bar. You can do hook grip, but that hurts a lot of people. Or you can build your grip. The way that I like to do this is carries, dead hangs, and suitcase deadlifts. I don't love a lot of the forearm extensions, the cat curls or whatever. It's fine, but it feels more to build the muscles of the forearm, which is totally fine if that's what you want to do. But in terms of holding on to something, why wouldn't we practice holding on to something? So I love heavy farmer carries for this, moving, back and forth in your gym, holding 100-pound dumbbells in each hand, dead hangs just off the rack, off the pull-up bar, holding for time for as long as you can. And then suitcase deadlift, it's a little more niche, but it does allow you to kind of not just work your grip, but also work your core. So look up a video on suitcase deadlift if you're not familiar. That is beyond the purview of this here video. Okay, so now let's put it all together. This is an example microcycle. I'm not gonna put the reps or anything like that in here. This is just a framework program for you to make your own. So let's say we're gonna start on day 1 with our bench and our squat. Totally fine. We're gonna have our primary deadlift and our bench press on day 2. Now, you may be saying to yourself, Jonah, you just told me, try not to squat and deadlift back to back. But if we are primary bench pressing and secondary squatting, meaning we're not squatting as heavy, or we're utilizing a supplemental or accessory movement for our squat, we might be able to get away with our deadlift. Again, this is a sample microcycle. You have to make this your own. Then on day 3, we're just gonna bench, and day 4, we're gonna squat and secondary deadlift. Oh my God, we're squatting and deadlifting on the same day? Yes, it's possible. Again, we have to be smart about it. If it's our primary squat, and then our secondary deadlift, we can look at our primary squat as another deadlift accessory movement. Great. So you can just say, hey, it's just fully deadlift day today. We're just squatting and we're doing our accessory deadlift. This is just one in the multitude of ways to program, but this is something that I have found that has worked for people in the past. It works for me. So if you want to throw this together, you can. If you do, let me know the reps and the volume that you're going to use in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Finally, make it your own. This is going to be on all of these types of videos. You have to make these programs your own or hire a coach. I'm a coach. There are a lot of great coaches in the industry. If you want to get in contact with me, there are 1,000 ways down in the description. Maybe not 1,000, maybe more like 3. But I'd love to talk to you about making this program your own. If you just want to chat about it, if you just want to run things by me and a group of people who are really intelligent in the strength game, you can join our Discord. I would encourage you to do that. Bring us your questions and we will try and answer them. That's all I have for you today. I hope that will increase your deadlift by 10,000 fold and you will deadlift as much as Super Saiyan 4 Goku, because everything past that is just kind of dumb. We don't do the supers here. I'm too old for that. We've gotten your deadlift taken care of. Now we need to work on your poverty bench. Go ahead and click on this video right here to learn how to fix that garbage bench press. Thank you so much for watching. Get strong and stay strong.